After almost 7 years in the role, Sir Ron Young is finishing up as chair of the Parole Board. As a former High Court judge and Chief District Court judge with decades of legal experience, he's had a unique perspective on the New Zealand justice system. Kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora. Well, thanks, Jack.
What is the purpose of parole?
The purpose of parole is to ensure that people who are ready to be back into the community are supported and looked after in that community.
What makes them ready?
Well, that's the difficult thing. And so we approach parole in this way. We think about why did an offender offend? That then informs the rehabilitation that they might need. And then once that's successfully done, we want to test whether what they've learnt they can apply day to day, and that's called reintegration.
So when you think about reintegration, how high on your list of concerns and priority is public safety?
Well, public safety is everything. I mean, that's the focus of the Parole Board. We're there to protect the public, and we're there to ensure, as best we're able, that people who are released won't reoffend.
People who have served long sentences in New Zealand are the least likely to reoffend. So if the primary concern of the Parole Board is the safety of us who haven't committed crimes, does that show that prison works?
It does. It shows that parole works, because for those who have been sentenced to less than 2 years, or maybe 2 to 3 years, the reoffending rates and the re-imprisonment rates are about 40%.
Right.
Whereas those in longer sentences, 8 years or more, down to 10%, because they've had that kind of rehabilitation, reintegration, testing before they're released.
So does that mean that we should be sentencing people to longer prison sentences in order to keep the public safe?
Well, what it suggests to me, for those under 2 years, whom we don't see at all, is that there has to be a rethink about whether or not those sentences are appropriate.
How so?
Well, because they are the people who come into prison and spend the 2 years or so being educated in the way of crime. I mean, they are the people that reoffend at that extraordinary rate, because it's kind of like a university of crime. And unless we do something about that, those are the future offenders, though, and that's why the public safety issue arises with them.
So what might an alternative look like to short or relatively short prison sentences?
Sure. There are a lot of halfway house kind of arrangements in Scandinavian countries that seem to have worked really well. And so I think we should explore that to see whether, rather than sending people to prison to be educated in the ways of crime, we should be trying to get them into the community but under control.
It's a hard sell for victims though, isn't it? To say to them, yep, under the previous system, the offender who has harmed you might have had a year in prison, but under the new system, we're going to send them to a halfway house.
Of course it is. It's a super hard sell. But the way in which it can be sold, because this is the facts, is that we want to do everything to make sure there are no more victims. And the way in which you do that is not by sentencing people to 2 years imprisonment and hoping they'll be okay when they're released. It's thinking about alternative ways.
According to Correction's most recent annual report, about 31% of people released on parole will reoffend within a 2-year period. Does that suggest that parole is granted too easily?
No, it's not. It also, of course, that's reoffending rather than re-imprisonment.
Yes.
And so a lot of people will simply reoffend in a relatively minor way. It also is spread across all of those people under 2 years and right through to the life imprisonment.
I think that's for people released on parole. So presumably
yes.
the people who have been sentenced to less than 2 years won't have seen the parole board.
But it is people 2 to 3 years and those relatively short sentences also.
Right.
And so I think they are the people at that end that we're trying to concentrate on.
You've talked about the importance of rehabilitation. The government has announced a significant funding boost to extend rehabilitative services to prisoners who are on remand. But as it stands, is the correction system adequately resourced?
Well, firstly, I think the money going into remand prisoners wasn't well targeted personally. Firstly, it was mostly drug and alcohol programs, which are valuable, but they're not criminogenic. They don't relate to risk, and therefore, without more, they're not likely to reduce reoffending. I think they would have been much better to have used that money directly in risk-based rehabilitation for those already sentenced.
Can you explain to us what risk-based reoffending
Okay, so it really relates to what I said right at the beginning. That is, we need to find out why someone has offended in the way they have. When we know that, that informs rehabilitation, and that's the risk-based rehabilitation. And so lots of things people think that should occur as a way of reducing crime actually don't work at all.
Right, like what?
Drug and alcohol programs without more.
Right. Back to my question, is corrections sufficiently resourced?
No, they're not. And because what's happened is that there's been significant delays in the provision of lots of the rehabilitation, reintegration. A lot of the reintegration testing can't occur because there aren't enough prison officers, to take people out in the community, see how they behave and the like. So it's underfunded.
It occurs to me that it's a rare day when we see a positive news headline for the Parole Board, right? In your time as Parole Board Chair, the Board's heard more than 50,000 cases. Most of those we never hear about, but there are occasionally really high-profile examples of cases where a prisoner is granted parole only then to reoffend in a really serious way. What happens when the Board gets it wrong?
When the Board gets it wrong in the sense that someone who's released has reoffended. What I do is I arrange for an independent report to be prepared by an academic, typically, who has experience in corrections and in psychological services. I see the victims of the crime once the report is prepared and go through it with them. And then we take what we can from that report and try and adjust our program and our process.
How does it affect you and other members of the Board?
It's the worst thing on earth to happen. I mean, it's the last thing we want to happen. This is a human system with human beings trying to do their best. And sometimes unpredictably, offenders offend. Sometimes there have been, the work that's been done by the Parole Board occasionally has been less than perfect, and we accept and understand that.
And you think that transparency is the key to,
yes.
to that. If a potentially dangerous offender is being released from prison, should people in their neighbourhood know about it?
I think it's a difficult debate because particularly for, and I know that most of the communities would especially want child sex offenders, to know that where they're going. But on the other hand, what is clear is that communities have then driven these people out of the community and they haven't been able to settle and they've reoffended. In other words, there's a downside for notification. But I think on balance, notification is fair.
Who should be responsible for notification?
Corrections.
Right. On Friday, the Law Commission published a report which calls for the abolition of preventive detention. They said that anyone detained to prevent them from reoffending should be detained in conditions distinct from punitive prison sentences. What are your thoughts?
I agree with that. I think that preventive detention is much more logically part of the process after someone has served their punishment. Because what we're trying to do with preventive detention is keep the community safe in a way that also accepts that someone served the sentence and they should only be restricted if it's absolutely clear that the community needs that for their safety.
I suppose many people would say the only reason you might be sentenced to preventive detention is because you are extremely dangerous and have offended in serious ways, therefore you don't deserve nice treatment.
Yes. Well, if we all want to be safe, 90% of these people are going to get out into the community again. And so we all have to work in the most effective way with them to ensure community safety.
What do you think of private prisons?
I'm not a fan. I don't mean in a philosophical sense. I mean in a practical sense. In New Zealand, I think I spent a lot of time trying to work with Serco and Auckland South, who are the only private prison providers. Not always very successfully, I'm afraid. I think I don't know what the cause is, but the reality is that the case management system has been pretty poor. Those are the people that look after prisoners. Psychological services standards have been extremely poor. I mean, we rely on good, accurate psychological reports. And when they let us down, then that compromises our decision making.
Because a lot of prisoners held there are serious prisoners as well.
Yes.
Serious offenders as well.
Yeah, I mean, Serco has about 18% of sentenced prisoners in New Zealand. I mean, it's massive. It has a huge effect.
When you say that Serco hasn't lived up to your standards in the operation of that Auckland South facility, does your criticism of private prisons extend beyond that? Is it a broader philosophy?
No, I don't. I'm not philosophically against it, although I think there is a good argument that if the state imprisons someone, the state should look after them. And so the example in New Zealand with Mount Eden, where originally Serco were looking after the prison, that has changed, and now corrections do. I don't think it's been a successful program at all.
In 2016, you expressed pointed concerns over the application of victim impact statements. And we hear a lot about a victim-centred justice system. Clearly there's been a significant change over your time in the legal sector when it comes to victim representations. Do you still have those concerns about the impact of victim impact statements?
Sure. Of course, I've not had so much of direct victim impact statements since I retired, but we've actually done a huge amount on the Parole Board to improve victim contact. We redrafted all of the written material, won a New Zealand Plain English Award. We've hugely increased the number of victims that the board sees. We've given training to the Parole Board members. So I've tried to make what they can offer and what they should say to the board easier, if you like.
Although victims can't appeal, can they? An offender who is denied parole can appeal that decision, but a victim cannot?
It's not an appeal system for offenders, but it's a review system, and victims can't. No, because, I mean, the criminal justice system is designed to convict the guilty, acquit the innocent, and punish the guilty. And victims do have a part in some of that, but they're not in that sense central, but they are central in a number of the ways in which the system works.
So should they have an opportunity to ask for a decision by the Parole Board to be reviewed?
I don't think they should be, but I think corrections should be able to.
Right.
And if they think that there are compelling reasons that we've got it wrong, I think both sides, in other words, should be able to test the correctness of our decisions.
You have had many decades of prestige in the New Zealand justice system and the justice system or legal system of many Pacific countries as well. What do you think is missing from the political debate over law and order in New Zealand?
Sure. I think research. Too much of the policy is based on sort of appealing to the public's sometimes worst instincts. I could use the example of the 3 strikes legislation because I think it's a good example. And because we've got a lot of experience with that, we've seen a number of people on the second strike, which is they've got to serve all the sentence. Those people don't get any rehabilitation. They're not interested. They don't see the value in it, and we can't force them, of course. Rehabilitation's got to be voluntary. So they leave at the end of their sentence not helped, not progressed, back into the community, high risk. Now, how's that making the community safer? It's an illusion that longer punishment makes people safer. And it's not, to me, based on any assessment, any research. It's just based on a kind of catchphrase.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations on your time in the role. We appreciate you being here today.
Thanks very much, Jack.